You know that voice, don't you? The one that rises unbidden, just as a spark of an idea begins to glow in the quiet corners of your mind. It's a murmur at first, a whisper softer than the wind through a winter-bare branch, yet it carries a weight that can anchor the strongest intention. It speaks of caution, of all the ways you might stumble, might falter, might find yourself standing exposed and foolish. It's a silent architect of hesitancy, building walls of what-ifs and not-enoughs around even the most heartfelt desires. For many, this inner critic becomes a constant companion, an unwelcome advisor perched on the shoulder. You know that voice, don't you? The one that rises unbidden, just as a spark of an idea begins to glow in the quiet corners of your mind. It's a murmur at first, a whisper softer than the wind through a winter-bare branch, yet it carries a weight that can anchor the strongest intention, whispering doubts into every nascent dream. And for a long, long time, Eugene was one of those many. You'd find him at 43 years old on the factory floor, a lean, wiry man of 5'10", his quick movements a testament to years of repetitive labor. Under the harsh glare of the fluorescent lights, his dark brown hair, already showing about 20% gray at the temples, was closely cropped, receding just slightly at the front. His angular face, sun-weathered with fine lines fanning out from deep-set hazel eyes, often seemed lost in thought, a faint scar above his left eyebrow a silent reminder of an old, forgotten mishap. His hands, though, those were the hands of a man who worked. Calloused palms, knuckles swollen from countless hours gripping tools, faint grease stains permanently ingrained under the fingernails. On his left forearm, a small, faded anchor tattoo hinted at a youthful impulse now worn smooth by time and toil. He moved with a quiet, restless energy, always observing, taking things in, though he kept most of it to himself. He was diligent, Eugene, the kind of worker who never missed a day, never complained, always delivering what was expected. Polite, too, if you spoke to him, but rarely one to start a conversation. He had a way of pausing, gathering his thoughts before speaking slowly, deliberately, using practical, grounded words. You wouldn't catch him telling a joke often, but every now and then a dry, understated wit would surface, a small, knowing twinkle in those hazel eyes. But beneath that reserved, almost placid surface, a constant battle raged. A deep yearning for creative expression pulsed within him, dismissed almost as soon as it arose. He had a natural aptitude for tinkering, for understanding how things worked, for imagining improvements. He'd bring home old, broken radios, carefully arranging them on the workbench in his small, meticulously kept garage, tools laid out with surgeon-like precision. He'd spend hours sketching intricate mechanical designs in a worn notebook, the lines precise, the concepts innovative. Almost inevitably, as the project neared a critical juncture, that voice would arrive. "What's the point, Eugene?" It would whisper, insidious and familiar. "You're no engineer, it'll never work right. You'll just make a mess. Who cares about an old radio anyway? Just a waste of time." And so the radios would sit half-rebuilt, gathering dust. The notebooks would close, the pages filled with brilliant, unfinished ideas. His quiet demeanor, people thought, was just who he was. But in truth, it was a shield, a silent defense against the constant internal barrage. He was a master of self-sabotage, his own harshest critic, always hearing a voice telling him his ideas weren't good enough, his skills inadequate, or that he'd just make a fool of himself. He yearned to build, to create, to see his visions take tangible form, but that insidious whisper held him captive, a silent, internal saboteur. His home, on the older side of town, reflected his quiet diligence. A small, tidy house, its front garden a burst of meticulously maintained color, the well-worn but comfortable furniture inside arranged with practical care. It wasn't a life of luxury, no, but it was steady. He drove an older model, dark blue Ford F-150, reliable and always kept clean, a testament to his belief in maintenance and care. Money was okay, always aware of finances, living paycheck to paycheck, but managing to save a little for a rainy day. He had Maria, his wife, a woman who understood his silences better than anyone, and his daughters. Elena, 16, already with a confident stride and a mind of her own, and Sophia, 12, a bright, vivacious girl whose spirit shone like a newly polished penny. They were his world, his quiet anchors in a life of internal storms. But even with them, the critic persisted, a shadow on his brightest moments, a silent thief of his creative joy. He didn't know it then, but something was about to shift, sparked by the very person who saw the world with the same wide-eyed wonder he'd long suppressed. A silent thief of his creative joy. Before that shift, though, life for Eugene moved with the predictable, grinding rhythm of the factory floor where he spent his days. The alarm clock, A chipped plastic thing on his bedside table shrieked at 4:30 a.m., a brutal interruption to the quiet darkness. His lean frame, sinewy and efficient, pushed up from the mattress, the faint scar above his left eyebrow a barely noticeable ridge in the dim light of dawn. His deep-set hazel eyes, still heavy with sleep, took a moment to focus on the familiar outlines of their bedroom. Maria, bless her, usually didn't stir. He moved like a shadow, pulling on work clothes that had seen too many washes, the fabric softened and faded. In the kitchen, the smell of freshly brewed coffee was his first real comfort of the day. He poured a mug, black and strong, the steam curling up to warm his angular face. Sometimes he'd find a note from Maria by the coffee maker, a quick, "Love you, Jean," or a reminder about a school event for the girls. He'd trace the words with a calloused finger, a moment of quiet connection before the day truly began. His hands, though, were already stiff, knuckles swollen from years of repetitive motion on the assembly line, the faded anchor tattoo on his left forearm a testament to a younger, more hopeful self. The old dark blue Ford F-150 rumbled to life with a turn of the key, a familiar growl in the pre-dawn stillness. It was his reliable steed, kept meticulously clean, inside and out. As he drove through the sleeping streets of their older neighborhood, past his own well-tended garden, he felt the cool, crisp air of early morning give way to the warmer, stale air of the approaching industrial zone. The silence of the drive was often filled, not with radio music, but with the buzzing hum of his own thoughts, thoughts that usually swerved away from anything remotely creative or ambitious. He was a master of self-sabotage, Eugene was. Pulling into the factory lot, the air already thick with the tang of metal and exhaust, the familiar voice in his head would begin its daily monologue. "Another day, Eugene," it would whisper as he walked past the skeletal frames of half-finished projects in the yard. "Don't go getting any ideas. You'd just mess it up, wouldn't you?" Inside, the harsh fluorescent lights hummed with a constant, unyielding glare, casting stark shadows across the concrete floor. The cacophony of the machines, presses shuddering, conveyors rattling, pneumatic drills hissing, was a symphony of modern labor. He moved with quick, practiced movements, his body remembering the choreography of his station even when his mind was elsewhere. His job was to operate a heavy stamping machine, feeding sheets of metal, pulling a lever, watching the die descend with a thunderous asterisk crack. Repeat, repeat, for 8 hours, sometimes 10. One morning, the feeder mechanism on his machine snagged, causing a slight misfeed. His first instinct was to grab his toolbox to tinker to fix it. He'd rebuilt old radios in his garage, taken apart and reassembled engines more times than he could count. But then the voice cut in, sharp and insistent. "You'll just make it worse, Eugene. Remember that time with the old VCR? Ended up costing more to fix than if you just left it alone." His hands, poised to act, faltered. He waved over a younger supervisor, offering a mumbled explanation about a finicky part. The supervisor, quick and efficient, made a minor adjustment with a wrench, and the machine resumed its steady rhythm. Eugene felt a familiar knot in his stomach, relief that he hadn't made a fool of himself, but also a dull ache of missed opportunity. He could have fixed that. He knew he could have. But the voice had won again. Lunch was a solitary affair. A sandwich and a thermos of coffee, eaten in the break room amidst the low din of other conversations he rarely joined. He'd sometimes pull a crumpled napkin from his pocket, where he'd sketched out an intricate mechanical design the night before, a new, more efficient jig for the press, or perhaps a blueprint for a self-watering system for Maria's prize-winning roses. His deep-set eyes would trace the lines, the gears, the clever little connections. But then, almost reflexively, the inner critic would chime in. "That's too complicated, Gene. It'll never work. Someone else has probably already thought of it and done it better. You'll just look silly bringing that up to the boss." He'd crumple the napkin slightly, tucking it back into his pocket, another abandoned project before it had even begun. His quiet demeanor, observant and reserved, was a well-constructed shield for this constant internal barrage, protecting him from external judgment, but trapping him with his own. Money was always on his mind. The subtle grease stains ingrained under his fingernails were a constant reminder of the physical labor that provided for his family. Every paycheck was accounted for, bills paid, a careful portion set aside into their modest savings. There were no major luxuries, just the steady hum of a life lived paycheck to paycheck, meticulously managed. He didn't complain, but the weight of it, the constant awareness of finances, added another layer to the quiet desperation that often settled around him like the factory dust. As the shift ended and he drove home, the fading golden hour light painted the sky in shades of bruised purple and orange. The contrast between the gritty, repetitive environment of the factory and the quiet, lived-in comfort of his small house was a sharp relief. But even as he pulled into his driveway, admiring Maria's meticulously maintained garden, the battles within him didn't cease. The creative urges, the fleeting thoughts of starting a new project in his garage workshop, were met with the same dismissive inner voice. "What's the point, Eugene? You'll just get halfway and quit. Better not to start at all." He'd often find himself puttering, cleaning tools, organizing nuts and bolts, anything but starting something new. He yearned for creative expression, a deeper meaning, but the critic always managed to convince him it was inadequate, that he was inadequate. He just didn't realize how much of himself he had already given away to that voice, how much potential lay dormant, waiting for a spark he hadn't yet found the courage to ignite. Maria's warm embrace, the chaotic chatter of Alina and Sophia, and the comforting scent of her chicken stew momentarily pushed back the relentless hum of the factory from Eugene's mind. He washed his calloused hands, the ingrained grease stains under his fingernails a stubborn reminder of his day, and sat down at the familiar kitchen table. He listened intently as Sophia recounted her day, her small hands animatedly describing a particularly tricky drawing assignment. Alina, quieter like him, sat across from her, already immersed in a textbook. Even amidst the simple rhythm of home, Eugene's mind wasn't entirely at peace. He'd nod, offer a thoughtful, or a slow, deliberate observation, but underneath, the gears of his inner world never stopped turning. After dinner, while Maria tidied and the girls retreated to their rooms, a restless energy, a subtle tremor, would begin to stir beneath his lean, wiry frame. He'd often find himself drawn to the garage, not to start a new project, but to wander amongst the tools and half-finished endeavors like a man visiting old ghosts. There was the skeletal frame of an old radio, meant to be rebuilt and modernized, now draped with a canvas sheet forgotten. A stack of meticulously drawn schematics for a precision clock mechanism, tucked away in a dusty drawer, the ink faded at the edges. Each abandoned item was a monument to a whisper, a voice that had started small but grew louder with every bolt turned and every line drawn. "That's not quite right, Eugene. Someone else could do it better. You'll just waste your time and money." It was a relentless chorus, chipping away at his enthusiasm, convincing him that his ideas were flawed, his skills inadequate, and that he'd inevitably make a fool of himself. What haunted Eugene most, what truly kept him staring at the ceiling long after Maria had drifted to sleep, was the memory of the Weaver. Years ago, spurred by a rare surge of inspiration, he'd envisioned a kinetic sculpture, a mesmerizing array of gears, levers, and polished brass that would tell the subtle story of time, not just by marking it, but by moving asterisk with it, a silent, intricate dance. He'd spent months in his spare time, poring over design books, sketching intricate plans on graph paper, his deep-set hazel eyes alight with a rare passion. His left forearm, with its faded anchor tattoo, would flex as he meticulously filed components, his swollen knuckles working with a delicate precision that belied their strength. He'd even begun collecting parts, tiny, discarded watch movements, repurposed bicycle chains, smooth, river-worn stones for counterweights. For a brief, intoxicating period, the garage had been a sanctuary, filled with the quiet, metallic whispers of creation. But then the voice began its insidious work. "Who do you think you are, an artist? It'll just be a clumsy mess. Maria needs that money for Sophia's school trip, not your silly contraptions." Each warning felt like a cold stone added to a growing pile, slowly burying his enthusiasm. The perfectionism, fueled by that critical internal editor, became paralyzing. He'd find a tiny imperfection, an almost imperceptible wobble in a gear, and the voice would amplify it until it consumed the entire project. One particularly rainy Saturday, after staring at the half-assembled sculpture for hours, his hands hovering, unable to make the next move, he'd simply covered it with a heavy canvas drop cloth. He told himself he was just taking a break, that he'd come back to it when he was ready. But the break stretched into weeks, then months, then years. The Weaver remained hidden, a silent accusation, a testament to a dream he'd allowed to wither. Sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, a shaft of stark, introspective shadow would creep across the bedroom wall, and Eugene would find himself replaying that decision, seeing the potential in his mind's eye, the way the light would have caught the brass, the smooth, rhythmic motion. A profound regret, a dull ache, would settle in his chest, a heavy blanket woven from abandoned ambition. He hadn't just given up on a project, he'd given up on a part of himself, and that was the true weight he carried, the quiet burden beneath his reserved demeanor. The canvas remained undisturbed, a tombstone for ambition. Eugene carried that weight, a dull throb in his chest, day in and day out, its presence as familiar as the ache in his knuckles after a long shift at the plant. The factory floor, with its relentless thrum and harsh fluorescent glow, often felt like an extension of his own internal landscape. Repetitive, predictable, a place where individuality was smoothed away, much like his own creative urges. He'd punch out, drive his reliable old Ford F-150 home, its dark blue paint still gleaming under his meticulous care, and slip back into the quiet rhythm of family life, his thoughts often a distant murmur. It was a Tuesday evening, the kind where the last tendrils of golden hour light were trying to pry their way through the kitchen window, casting long, stark shadows across the well-worn pine table. Maria was humming softly as she chopped vegetables for dinner, a familiar, comforting sound. Elena, already in the thick of her teenage world, was likely in her room, headphones on, a world away. Eugene sat in his usual chair by the window, ostensibly reading a forgotten newspaper, but truly just observing, letting his mind drift, watching the dust motes dance in the fading light. His gaze, deep-set and hazel, was drawn to the front door as he heard the familiar squeak of its hinges. Sophia usually burst through that door like a spring uncoiling, a whirlwind of bright energy, dropping her backpack with a thud, recounting her day in a torrent of words. Today, however, there was no burst. The door closed with a gentle click. A small, hunched figure, her usually vibrant spirit strangely muted, shuffled into the living room. Her backpack, a riot of colorful patches, seemed to drag her down, almost swallowing her small frame. Her dark brown hair, usually bouncing with every step, hung limp around her face, obscuring her eyes. Eugene's hand, calloused and veined, paused midair, a faint grease stain under his thumbnail catching the last gleam of light. Something was off. He watched quietly as Sophia slowly set her backpack down by the coat rack, not throwing it with her usual abandon. She didn't look up, didn't greet him. She just stood there for a moment, shoulders slumped, a tiny island of sadness in the warm, fading glow of the room. "Soph!" Eugene's voice was low, deliberate, cutting through the quiet hum of the house. He often paused to gather his thoughts, but this time the pause was for her to acknowledge him, for her to surface from whatever had swallowed her vivacity. She flinched, as if surprised he was there, then slowly turned. Her face, usually so open and bright, was drawn, her lower lip trembling slightly. Her hazel eyes, so much like his own but often filled with an unburdened joy, were clouded, brimming with unshed tears. "Hey, Papa." She mumbled, her voice barely a whisper, thick with a held-back sob. She CLP'd her small hands together, twisting the fabric of her school uniform. Maria, noticing the sudden silence, emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Sophia, me amor, what's wrong?" Her voice was soft, immediate. Sophia's gaze darted between her parents, then landed on her lap as if the floorboards held all the answers. "My drawing." She finally managed, the words catching in her throat. "In art class, Ms. Peterson, she said it wasn't good." Eugene felt a subtle tightening in his chest, a familiar knot. He didn't speak, just waited, his deep-set eyes observing every nuance of her distress. "I drew a horse," she continued, her voice gaining a fragile edge of indignation, "and trees for a forest like the ones by the creek. And Ms. Peterson." She looked at it and she said my horse looked like a lumpy potato. Lumpy potato. A tear finally escaped, tracing a path down her cheek. "And my trees," she said, "they were uninspired. She said I needed to try harder, that they just looked like what I usually think." Sophia pulled out a crumpled sheet of paper from her backpack, the image a tangle of green scribbles and a rather endearing, if somewhat unhorse-like, brown shape. The words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding, like shards of glass. "Lumpy potato. Uninspired. What I usually think." Eugene's mind, usually a quiet, ordered space, suddenly became a cacophony of echoes. Lumpy, uninspired, flawed, not good enough. He had heard those exact words in different forms from a voice much closer than any art teacher, a voice that had lived in his own head for decades. It was the same voice that had mocked his half-built radio, that had scoffed at his intricate mechanical designs, that had ultimately covered the weaver with a heavy canvas. He looked at Sophia again, at the crumpled drawing clutched in her small, trembling hand. Her usually bright spirit was dimmed, shrouded in the same self-doubt that had crippled him. In her wide, watery hazel eyes, he didn't just see his daughter's hurt, he saw a mirror. He saw his own paralysis, his own retreat from imperfection, his own quiet surrender to the inner critic. He saw years of abandoned projects, of dreams left to rot under a dropped cloth. He had allowed that voice to win in himself, and now he was watching it extinguish the fire in his own child. A fierce, cold resolve, unlike anything he had felt in years, began to spread through him. It wasn't anger at the teacher, though a flicker of protectiveness surged. It was a searing clarity, a sudden, brutal awakening. He would not let this happen. Not to her. And staring at the raw vulnerability etched on his daughter's face, he knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that he would not let it happen to himself any longer. The quiet burden shifted, transforming in that fading golden light into something sharper, something resembling a weapon. The house breathed around Eugene, a soft symphony of settled wood and sleeping breath. Down the hall, Maria's gentle snore was a familiar comfort, Elena and Sophia tucked in their own quiet worlds. But for Eugene, sleep had retreated like a shy creature, leaving him alone in the profound stillness of the hour. 3 o'clock, the digital clock on the stove glowed a faint, unsettling green. He was sprawled in the old armchair in the living room, a ghost in his own home, the dark pressing in around him, heavy as a foundry plate. His fingers, thick with calluses and the permanent scent of metal and oil, absently traced the worn fabric of the armrest. The faint anchor on his left forearm, a youthful impulse now faded to a pale whisper, felt cold beneath his touch. What had his life become? This silent hour, stripped of the factory's din and the family's gentle chatter, often laid bare the stark, unvarnished truth. Day in, day out, the same motions, the same machines, the same secure, predictable, suffocating routine. The Ford F-150, reliable as the sunrise, but it always drove the same route. The meticulously tended garden, yes, beautiful, but it yielded the same predictable blooms each season. It was all so managed, controlled, safe. That safety, he realized now, had been a cage. A very comfortable, well-maintained cage. The image of Sophia's face, crumpled in quiet despair over a smudged pencil line, tore through his thoughts again. Her bright spirit, so eager to create, suddenly shadowed by a careless word, an echo of the very voice that had haunted him for decades. He thought of the shortwave radio in the garage, half reassembled, its intricate circuits a tangled mess he'd simply walked away from. Too complicated, Eugene. You'll just break it worse. Better to leave it alone. He saw the rolled-up sketches in his bottom drawer, designs for a self-cleaning water filtration system he'd envisioned for Maria's plants, abandoned when the calculations grew complex. That's an engineer's job, not a factory man's. You'll only make a fool of yourself. Always that voice, insidious and persistent, a relentless internal foreman inspecting his every ambition, finding fault always. His secret hopes, those fragile, unvoiced yearnings for something more, felt like distant stars in this lonely night. To build something that wasn't just a component on an assembly line. To create with his own 2 hands, something that didn't just asterisk work, but had a spark of his own invention. To feel the surge of pride not just in a perfectly trimmed hedge, but in a completed, imperfect, finished asterisk project. He'd learned to dismiss them, to bury them under the mundane, the practical, the financially sensible. Maria and the girls, they depended on him. He couldn't be indulging in foolish pipe dreams. But Sophia, her eyes had burned away the rationale. His greatest fear wasn't failure. It was the quiet surrender, the gradual acceptance that he wasn't capable, that he wasn't enough. And watching that fear, that slow, insidious paralysis begin to take root in his daughter, was a wound unlike any he'd ever known. It was more than just his own disappointment. It was the chilling realization that he was passing on his own quiet disease. A slow, deliberate breath filled his chest, the air cool and still. The inner critic, that omnipresent, meticulous editor, was still there, of course. He could almost hear it now, a low hum of doubt, pointing out every way he could still fail, every reason he should just go back to sleep, forget this foolishness. You're tired. You're overthinking. What good will it do? But for the first time in years, Eugene didn't just passively accept the pronouncements. He listened, truly listened, to the cadence of the voice. It wasn't just malicious. Beneath the cynicism, there was a strange, almost frantic anxiety. It was trying to keep him safe, to prevent the sting of ridicule, the pain of exposed vulnerability. It was like a nervous sentry, always on high alert for danger. A glimmer of an idea, fragile as a spider web in the dark, began to unfurl in his mind. What if he didn't fight the sentry, didn't try to silence it? What if he acknowledged its warnings, even thanked them? What if he used its meticulous eye, its constant search for flaws, not to shut himself down, but to make his work stronger, more resilient? What if this constant companion, this quiet adversary, could actually be a meticulous advisor? The thought was a jolt, a cold spark in the deep, introspective shadows of the room. He shifted in the armchair, the worn springs groaning softly. His hazel eyes, usually deep-set and guarded, held a new, quiet intensity, reflecting the dim glow of the digital clock. The night was still long, the path ahead uncertain. But as the first hint of pre-dawn gray began to seep through the curtain cracks, Eugene felt a strange, subtle hum deep within him. Not the hum of the factory, but something entirely new, entirely his own. The sun, still a promise beyond the horizon, painted the eastern sky in soft, bruised purples and grays. Eugene eventually pushed himself up from the armchair, his joints protesting with a soft pop. He moved towards the kitchen, the linoleum cool beneath his worn slippers. Maria and the girls would be stirring soon, the house filling with the gentle chaos of morning. But for a few precious minutes, it was just him and the quiet whir of the refrigerator. He stood by the window, staring out at the meticulously kept garden that was still cloaked in shadows, a testament to his own quiet dedication. For years, he'd tilled that soil, pulled stubborn weeds, nurtured fragile seedlings. And for just as many years, he'd allowed a different kind of weed to flourish in his mind, one that choked out every tender sprout of an idea, every whispered hope for something more. That voice, the one that mimicked his own, had been a constant companion since he was a boy, telling him his hands weren't steady enough, his drawings aren't precise enough, his thoughts weren't clever enough. It had been there when he'd painstakingly sketched out a new, more efficient jig for the line at the factory, only to crumple the paper before anyone could see. It had been there when he'd almost signed up for that evening welding class, whispering, "You'll just make a fool of yourself, Eugene. Stick to what you know." He thought of Sophia's face, the way her shoulders had slumped, the light in her eyes dimming just a touch when her art teacher, in a well-meaning but ultimately crushing way, had critiqued her vibrant drawing of a fantastical bird. "Not quite anatomically correct, Sophia," the teacher had said, "and the colors are a bit wild." Eugene had seen his own paralysis, his own learned resignation, mirrored in his daughter's hesitant retreat from her canvas. It had been a punch to the gut, a sharp, unwelcome echo of his own internal monologue. He told her, "Don't let it bother you, honey, just try again." But even as he said the words, he knew he was a hypocrite. He hadn't just tried again for decades. The coffee maker gurgled to life, filling the kitchen with its earthy aroma. Eugene poured himself a mug, the warmth seeping into his calloused hands, the small anchor tattoo on his forearm a faint blue against his sun-weathered skin. He took a slow sip, his deep-set hazel eyes fixed on the condensation blooming on the windowpane. The factory whistle would blow in an hour, pulling him into another day of repetitive motion, of precise, practiced movements that left his hands swollen and tired. But this morning, something was different. It wasn't a sudden burst of courage or a dramatic declaration. It was something far quieter, far deeper. It was a slow, settling weight in his chest, a kind of profound weariness with the old way. He hadn't fought the critic, he'd simply surrendered to it, let it dictate the terms of his existence. He had allowed it to define the boundaries of his capabilities, to shrink his world until it felt safe, predictable, and undeniably small. But seeing Sophia's spirit momentarily falter, seeing the shadow of his asterisk shadow fall across her burgeoning creativity, had been the absolute turning point. It was a quiet, internal, resolute, "Enough! Not, I will defeat it," because he knew that voice wasn't going anywhere. But I will no longer be governed by it. He wasn't sure what it would look like, this new path. He didn't have a grand plan, no sudden blueprint for a new invention or a masterpiece painting. But the decision was made, solid as the worn counter he leaned against. He would listen, yes. He would acknowledge. But he would also act. He would finish what he started, not for perfect praise, but for the quiet satisfaction of completion, of wrestling with the doubt and emerging, if not victorious, then at least still standing. The first rays of actual sunlight, thin and hopeful, finally stretched across the garden, illuminating the dew-kissed leaves, and Eugene felt ready to meet them. Dictable and undeniably small. But seeing Sophia's spirit momentarily falter, seeing the shadow of his asterisk shadow fall across her burgeoning creativity, had been the absolute turning point. It was a quiet, internal, resolute, "Enough! Not, I will defeat it." Because he knew that voice wasn't going anywhere. But I will no longer be governed by it. He wasn't sure what it would look like, this new path. He didn't have a grand plan, no sudden blueprint for a new invention or a masterpiece painting. But the decision was made, solid as the worn counter he leaned against. He would listen, yes. He would acknowledge, but he would also act. He would finish what he started, not for perfect praise, but for the quiet satisfaction of completion, of wrestling with the doubt and emerging, if not victorious, then at least still standing. The first rays of actual sunlight, thin and hopeful, finally stretched across the garden, illuminating the dew-kissed leaves, and Eugene felt ready to meet them. The factory floor, later that morning, hummed with its usual mechanical drone. Harsh fluorescent lights cast a sickly gray pallor over everything, including the faces of the men and women who moved with practiced, repetitive motions. Eugene worked his station, feeding metal sheets into a press, the rhythmic asterisk thump-clank echoing the internal tempo of his own thoughts. His lean, wiry frame moved efficiently. His calloused hands, marked by years of grease stains and swollen knuckles, guided the material with almost unconscious precision. But his mind wasn't entirely on the job. It kept drifting back to Sophia's disappointed eyes and the quiet vow he'd made. A restless energy, usually suppressed, thrummed just beneath his reserved exterior. He drove home that evening in his dark blue F-150, the setting sun painting the sky in muted golds and blues that momentarily softened the harsh lines of the industrial landscape. The familiar comfort of his small, tidy house welcomed him. Maria met him with a gentle smile, the scent of dinner wafting from the kitchen. Elena, his eldest, was immersed in homework, while Sophia, still a little subdued, sketched quietly at the kitchen table. He ruffled her hair, a silent promise in the gesture. After dinner, as Maria and the girls settled into their evening routines, Eugene found himself drawn not to the worn armchair, but to the back door leading to the garage. It was a quiet space, smelling faintly of oil, sawdust, and old electronics, a sanctuary and a graveyard for his half-formed ambitions. The fading golden hour light filtered through the grimy window panes, casting long, introspective shadows. His eyes fell on an old tube radio, a relic from the 50s he'd found at a yard sale months ago. It sat on his workbench, a jumble of wires, resistors, and vacuum tubes, its wooden casing stripped bare, ready for refinishing. Or rather, unready. He destarted it with enthusiasm, tracing circuits, cleaning components. Then the voice had started. "You'll never get the hum out. The capacitor bank is too complex. You'll just fry it. Why bother? It's just an old radio." And so it sat, a monument to his familiar cycle of self-sabotage. He stopped, his hand hovering over the workbench. It was day one of his new path, and the Critic was already a formidable presence. "Just leave it, Eugene. You're tired. You had a long day. What's one more night? Besides, you're not an electronics wizard. You'll mess it up." The words were so familiar, so ingrained, they felt like his own thoughts. A knot tightened in his stomach, the familiar paralysis creeping in, making his quick movements slow, hesitant. His deep-set hazel eyes, usually so observant, were now clouded with internal debate. He wanted to turn, to retreat to the living room, to the predictable solace of a newspaper. But then Sophia's face flashed in his mind, her small shoulders slumped, the light gone from her eyes. No, not again, not for her, and not for him. He took a slow, deliberate breath, the scent of dust and aged metal filling his lungs. "It's just an old radio," he murmured aloud, the words quiet, practical, grounded. "And it's not going to fix itself." His voice was slow, a little gravelly, as if forcing itself past an internal resistance. He picked up a screwdriver from its neatly organized spot on the pegboard. His calloused fingers, though accustomed to repetitive factory tasks, felt almost clumsy, unused to this act of deliberate defiance. The inner voice scoffed, "A screwdriver won't fix a circuit, you fool." "No," Eugene replied, not bothering to vocalize it, just letting the thought solidify in his mind. "But it'll put the casing back together, one step." With a quiet click, he flicked on the single bare bulb above his workbench. The stark light cut through the twilight, illuminating the radio, not as a symbol of failure, but as a tangible challenge. He didn't feel joy or even excitement. He felt a quiet, grim resolve. His hand, still trembling slightly, reached for a loose wooden panel, fitting it back into place. It was a tiny victory, almost imperceptible. But he had started. He had acted. The hum of the factory floor had been replaced by the quiet, hopeful whisper of a man defying himself. 3 days later, the quiet resolve had begun to chafe. The old radio, now partially reassembled, sat accusingly on the workbench, a complex tangle of wires and soldered joints that refused to cooperate. Eugene, his deep-set hazel eyes narrowed in concentration, traced a finger along a schematic he'd found online. The lines blurred the technical jargon of frustrating language he barely understood. "You're out of your depth, Eugene," the voice whispered, its tone laced with familiar contempt. "Just put it down. No one cares if this old junk works. You're a factory man, not an electrician." His calloused hands, normally so precise with their repetitive motions on the assembly line, felt clumsy, inadequate. A bead of sweat trickled down his temple, just past the faint scar above his left eyebrow. He thought of Sophia, her shoulders slumped, the bright crayon drawing crumpled in her small fist. He pictured the way her eyes, usually so full of vibrant curiosity, had dulled. He wouldn't let his own fear make her feel that way again. Taking a slow, deliberate breath, he pushed back from the bench. "Not yet," he muttered, surprising himself with the audible sound. He reached for a different manual, thicker, older, and started over, section by section, cross-referencing, moving with a quiet, dogged persistence that had always been his secret weapon. By the seventh day, the initial momentum had entirely vanished, replaced by a dull, persistent ache in his knuckles and the nagging monotony of repeated failures. He'd spent hours trying to diagnose a static issue, only to find the problem was far more fundamental, a dead transformer. His shoulders, usually stoic, slumped slightly as he stared at the inert component, its copper coils silent and lifeless. "See, wasted a whole week. Just like everything else you try, pointless. Give it up, Eugene. Go help Maria in the garden. That's something you're actually good at." The garden was calling. He could almost smell the damp earth, feel the quiet satisfaction of pulling weeds. It would be easy to walk away, to let the radio become another half-finished ghost in the garage, a monument to his creative cowardice. His gaze drifted to a small, laminated drawing taped to the pegboard, a clumsy, vibrant depiction of their old Ford F-150, signed Sophia. That little drawing, still so full of innocent ambition despite its flaws, was enough. He ran a hand over his closely cropped hair, feeling the rough stubble on his jaw. "No." He spoke a little louder this time, his voice low and steady. "Not good enough to quit." He closed his eyes, visualizing the intricate path of the current, thinking of the many different ways a circuit could fail or be made to work. There had to be another way, a workaround, a salvaged part. 2 weeks in, the radio was a mess of temporary connections and exposed wires, but it hummed faintly. Not music, just a hopeful electric thrum. He was meticulously soldering a new capacitor he'd scrounged from an old VCR when, with a sickening asterisk snap asterisk, the delicate lead broke clean off. His quick, wiry frame stiffened. The small part, now useless, clattered to the floor. "There it is. The end. Just throw it all in the scrap bin. You're no craftsman, Eugene. You just break things. Always have." A wave of frustration, sharp and sudden, washed over him. His fist clenched, his knuckles swollen from years of repetitive factory tasks, almost striking the bench. He stood there, frozen, the harsh fluorescent light glinting off the faded anchor tattoo on his forearm. For a long moment, the familiar paralysis threatened to take hold, to drag him back into the safe, quiet harbor of doing nothing. He saw his daughters' faces in his mind, Alina's fierce determination with her studies, Sophia's unyielding belief in her art despite setbacks. He couldn't let their asterisk spark dim because he couldn't face his own. He picked up the broken capacitor, turning it over in his fingers. The voice continued its insidious campaign, but Eugene was learning to listen differently. "It's trying to tell me to be careful, to find a stronger part or a different way to connect it," he realized. He wasn't shutting the voice down. He was filtering it, extracting the kernel of valid warning from the chaff of self-destruction. He thought about the factory floor, the way a problem on the line wasn't a reason to quit, but a puzzle to be solved, a process to be refined. With a